On this Thursday night, turbulence on deck. Air Canada's strategy to get through the summer as frustration builds at airports.
They delayed our flight, we missed our cruise, so we are out of so much money.
Another shot in the arm, fresh COVID vaccine recommendations for the fall. Penalties piling up.
Brands, big companies, they're monitoring what they're seeing.
The sponsors shutting out Hockey Canada. And Litton BC 1 year later.
Roared through and decimated just about everything.
The struggle to rebuild a fire-ravaged village.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Well, just on the eve of summer holidays, there's more disappointment for Canadians ready to travel. After 2 years of COVID restrictions and weeks of chaos at airports, the nation's largest airline is now cancelling many flights this summer. Air Canada says the cuts are necessary as it grapples with soaring demand for travel. Through July and August, Air Canada is cancelling an average of 154 flights or 77 round trips per day.
It's going to put a lot of people behind and frustrate a lot of people.
I don't think it's going to be a good thing for anybody this summer, especially being that everybody's just starting to travel again.
Now that we thought COVID was done and Air Canada is unable to supply these flights, it's just outrageous.
It's another blow for Canada's struggling aviation industry, which had already taken a hit when WestJet announced earlier it would be scaling back its services this summer. The markets reacted quickly today. Air Canada shares dropped nearly 9%, falling to levels not seen since the pandemic first hit in 2020. Heather Yourex-West has tonight's top story.
Flavia Machado's efforts to get from Calgary to her home in France are going nowhere fast.
We have to go to Paris today, but our first flight is 3 hours delay, so we will miss the second one.
It's a frustration travelers have come to know well. From Montreal,
They delayed our flight, we missed our cruise, so we are out of so much money.
to Edmonton.
I've been flying the last 18 years, and I've never seen it like this.
With the busy summer travel season just getting started, Canada's biggest airline says it calls for a big change. In an email to customers, Air Canada's president and CEO called the current strain on global aviation unprecedented and unforeseen. With reluctance, Michael Rousseau writes, we are now making meaningful reductions to our schedule in July and August.
They felt they had to do it because of the pressures they were facing as a result of federal service failures at the airport.
The federal government says it's working with stakeholders to hire more staff at customs and security. But one passenger rights advocate says the airline is responsible as well.
They have been selling tickets for flights that they didn't have the staffing, didn't have the resources, didn't have the airport capacity to serve.
Air Canada's announcement comes 2 weeks after WestJet said it was changing its flight plans as well, reducing routes in eastern Canada in order to focus more on routes here in the west. Those changes aren't expected to take effect until early next year.
WestJet is reducing its summer flight schedule compared to years past, but that was planned for, and the company doesn't anticipate canceling a significant number of flights. Frustration mounting. These European travelers aren't sure they'll be back.
Do you think that you'll fly Canadian Airlines again?
I don't know. We don't know.
The baggage that comes with flying through Canadian airports, just too much to handle. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Canada isn't the only country experiencing travel turmoil. Britain made a call to airlines today to run realistic summer schedules and support passengers during delays and cancellations. Staff shortages at London's Heathrow Airport have left airlines struggling to keep up with luggage and the demands of passengers. The airport asked airlines to cancel 30 flights today because passenger numbers exceeded capacity. Critics accuse the airlines of selling more tickets than they can honor, which the airlines deny. Word today that we're not keeping up with our COVID-19 shots. As we learn to live with COVID, some Canadians, it seems, are becoming reluctant to get their boosters. Only around 56% of Canadians have had at least one booster shot. Yet the pandemic has not gone away, and there is still a risk that hospitalizations will rise. Today, Canada's Health Minister, Jean-Yves Duclos, said 2 doses are simply not enough, and that you are not up to date if you haven't had at least a shot in the last 9 months. Jamie Mauracher has more.
The one that you'd be getting today is the Moderna vaccine.
It's been well over a year since COVID vaccines became available to most Canadian adults. But depending on when your last shot was, Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos says you may no longer be considered up to date.
And to be up to date means that we've had a dose of vaccine in the last 9 months.
Many have held off on more than a double dose, some citing protection from recent infection, while others are delaying until bivalent or variant-specific vaccines becomes available. This week, the US FDA recommended the next wave of COVID boosters include components targeting Omicron's BA4 and BA5 subvariants. But Canada's top doctor wouldn't say when those will be approved here.
The current vaccine is still very effective against particularly serious outcomes and deaths. And so getting that booster is something that can be done while waiting.
COVID shot maker Moderna is hoping the wait won't be long. Thursday, it became the first to submit an application to Health Canada for approval of its updated vaccine.
The antibody levels versus these two new sublineage strains show that the antibody levels are 5 to 6 times higher versus pre-boost.
Both Pfizer and Novavax have reported similar results. At Dalhousie University, Dr. Lisa Barrett has been watching the mutations closely and says most of us should be able to time our next shots just ahead of a seasonal surge.
Now we're at a point in the pandemic where you need to think about the right dose of the right vaccine at the right time in the right person.
One more reminder that COVID-19 in all its forms isn't done with us yet. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
This should be an exciting time in Ottawa, but the city is also bracing itself for hundreds of thousands of people to pour into the nation's capital to celebrate Canada Day in person for the first time since the pandemic began. But there are fears that demonstrations will erupt in the downtown core, just months after convoy protesters created gridlock for several weeks last winter. That protest was largely over vaccine mandates that have now been relaxed or removed. But as Kyle Benning reports, there may be new protests this long weekend.
Go down the right street in Ottawa right now, and you can feel it. There is a buzz running through the capital that this year's Canada Day festivities will look and feel different.
We're inviting Canadians and Ottawa citizens, visitors, to come and enjoy a family-friendly activity, right? We've been apart for 2 years now, and this is really the time to enjoy each other.
This is the first time in half a century where Canada Day events will not be unfolding on Parliament Hill. Also new for July 1st, the lingering concerns from residents and community leaders about how many so-called Freedom Convoy protesters will enter the city. Some individuals who organized earlier cross-country protests have returned. One not by choice.
See you soon, Tamara. Hold the line.
Tamara Leach was brought back to an Ottawa court for breaching bail conditions. And Conservative leadership hopeful Pierre Poilievre showed his support Thursday, joining James Topp, the Canadian soldier who was court-martialed for criticizing vaccine mandates. Bridget Belton protested earlier this year, but won't be in Ottawa this week. She has sympathy for those who are still rallying against pandemic mandates.
The lack of freedom, it's still not returned. A lot of people assume that we have all our freedoms back.
Ottawa's mayor and police chief have said officers will be ready for anything. More than 800 RCMP officers who were deputized for the spring's Rolling Thunder convoy are available and on standby. Some organizers say demonstrations could take place every weekend up until Labor Day. So this could just be the start of several loud months on the Hill. Eric?
Kyle Benning in Ottawa, thank you. To Ukraine now, where Western allies are declaring a major victory in the ongoing war with Russia after Moscow announced the total withdrawal of troops from the strategic Black Sea outpost of Snake Island.
If you wanted evidence of the amazing ability of the Ukrainians to fight back, to overcome adversity and to repel the Russians, then look at what has happened just today on Snake Island, where again Russia has had to cede ground.
Located just 35 kilometers off Ukraine's coast, the strategic outpost has been occupied by Russian forces since late February, effectively blockading Ukraine's Odessa region and preventing grain exports from leaving nearby ports. Russia calls its withdrawal a gesture of goodwill to prove it was not obstructing shipments. But in new video released today, Ukraine's defense ministry claims to have driven the Russian forces out overnight with the help of weapons provided by its international partners. The battle for Ukraine's Donbas region is still raging. The city of Lysychansk is under constant shelling, and the Russian military tries to grind down Ukrainian forces. But Canada is now promising more help this summer, with plans to send armored vehicles and drones. David Aiken reports.
Canada will answer the call from the Ukraine for vehicles that can safely move Ukrainian troops through combat zones. As the NATO summit finished in Madrid, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Canada will send 39 armored personnel carriers overseas this summer.
All of us have recommitted to being there to support Ukraine because they are fighting not just for their own territory but our democracies.
The carriers are built in London, Ontario, and were to be part of a delivery of 360 armored carriers ordered up by Canada's military. But Canada can wait for that delivery a little bit longer. The need in Ukraine is more urgent.
The best use for Canadian security and for geopolitical stability is to put them in the hands of Ukrainians, but we are committed to replenishing those stocks.
Canada will also provide Ukraine with 6 more drone cameras.
I think it's terrific that we are taking our responsibility very seriously in terms of contributing and doing our share for collective defense. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we just realized how vulnerable we are.
But Canada has now exhausted the $500 million the Trudeau government set aside in the 2022 budget for military aid to Ukraine. Trudeau said Ukraine can't expect Canada to continue to do more, but by many metrics, Canada's defense capability is shrinking. Retention and recruitment is short of targets. The department is looking to cut costs, and data published by NATO itself shows Canada's defense spending is falling.
Canada should really allocate more in terms of our financial commitment to NATO. We're not meeting the 2% threshold.
The defense minister sees things differently.
We are the 6th largest defense budget in NATO countries, and we will continue to be wholly committed to this multilateral alliance in many ways.
But when you measure the country's defense spending relative to the size of its economy, well, Canada ranks 24th among 29 NATO allies. In fact, that ratio, defense spending relative to GDP, is going to be just 1.27% this year. That's NATO's figure, and that's the lowest for Canada since 2016. Eric.
David Aiken in Madrid. Thank you, David. It's being called a crisis of legitimacy. Coming up, the intensifying criticism against the U.S. Supreme Court. History was made in Washington today as Ketanji Brown Jackson became the first black woman to be sworn in as a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. But it comes at a time when the court faces questions over its legitimacy after rulings that rolled back the rights of Americans and challenged the rule of the federal government. Jackson Prosco has that story.
So help me God.
Her appointment changes the course of history. But it's unlikely Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson will be able to stop the historic rollback of American rights at the hands of the Supreme Court.
We now have a political Supreme Court in the United States of America. And I think a lot of us, lawyers in particular, never thought we would utter those words.
In the past month, the conservative majority on the bench has tossed aside 5 decades of abortion access, told states they can't regulate who carries guns in public, and Thursday, in a blow to the fight against climate change, the court stripped the powers of the federal government to regulate greenhouse gas emissions.
And you think this decision by the court was an outrage or a significant mistake, vote. Show up and vote. That's how we'll change it.
The rulings are at odds with elected governments and popular opinion, leading to a crisis of legitimacy for the highest court in the U.S.
If people were paying attention, this was the logical result of seeded work that took decades to ultimately come to fruition.
Conservative groups and Republican politicians have spent years working to appoint justices friendly to their cause. The court itself has no ethics code, and there are no consequences for justices who may have lied under oath about their view of cases they ultimately ruled on, like abortion.
Roe v. Wade is an important precedent of the Supreme Court.
It has been reaffirmed many times.
The result is a body that is unelected and unaccountable, and is drastically reshaping American life with remarkable speed. In its next term, the court will take up a case that could radically reshape elections for president and Congress by letting states decide exactly how elections are run. That is the basis of the same legal theory that former President Donald Trump was pushing as he sought to overturn the 2020 election. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Ahead, why some Canadian companies are skating off the ice and taking their sponsorships with them.
You're watching Global National.
It's been a week and a half since Hockey Canada executives were called to Parliament Hill after disturbing allegations against several players. Hockey Canada responded, but many MPs were not satisfied with what they heard. And now some large corporate sponsors are pulling their money off the ice. Mike Drolet reports.
The hits are piling up for Hockey Canada. Tim Hortons has now suspended its funding to the national organization, joining Scotiabank, TELUS, and Canadian Tire in urgently seeking concrete details from Hockey Canada about how it intends to change the culture of the sport. Hockey Canada released a statement saying more needs to be done and more quickly. A similar message to the one that irked MPs at a special hearing last week in Ottawa and leading to the government freezing federal funding.
I haven't got really from any of you reassurances that Hockey Canada has changed in their harassment, bullying, and abuse policies.
Hockey Canada has been under fire since it was accused of trying to keep quiet a multi-million-dollar settlement to a woman who claimed 8 players, including members of the national junior team, had assaulted her at a 2018 gala in London, Ontario. None of the allegations have been proven in court, and Hockey Canada says it did all it could since the accused refused to cooperate with their investigation. But marketers say there's a big difference between legal and moral responsibility. And Bob Stellick sees public opinion so squarely against Hockey Canada right now, sponsors have no choice but to step away.
Everything comes in an avalanche and it comes so quickly. You can't really control your message because it's coming at you from everyone. Everyone's a pundit. Everyone has an opinion. So brands, big companies, they're monitoring what they're seeing.
And they're demanding action, similar to what was promised after the Graham James scandal that transformed Sheldon Kennedy from a victim to an activist.
This is not about wrecking sport. This is about getting this right.
Yet he says the culture has barely changed at the national level. Hockey Canada, he says, needs to get its priorities straight.
If we spent as much time on this stuff as we do on the power play, or even half the amount of time on these issues as we do on the power play, we're going to get better teams. We're going to get better individuals.
Can Hockey Canada come up with a plan of action? Its financial future depends on it. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Litton revisited. The BC town wiped out by fire. We return 1 year later.
Oh my God, that's a tornado!
Tornado, and not just one. Environment Canada confirms 3 tornadoes touched down in parts of Saskatchewan on Wednesday night as storms moved through the province. The severe weather is still being investigated, but all 3 tornadoes were given tentatively the lowest intensity ratings. Damage from affected areas included downed trees and power lines and destroyed farm structures. There's no word of any injuries. It was a different type of natural disaster that happened at this time last year in British Columbia. The entire community of Litton BC was destroyed. The small BC town was virtually wiped out by a massive inferno 1 year ago, right after setting the record for the hottest temperatures recorded in Canadian history. 2 people were killed while hundreds lost their homes. A tragedy also seen as a sign of the future as our climate warms. Nitu Garcha is in Litton tonight with more on this somber anniversary. Nitu.
Eric, it is overcast with temperatures in the low 20s, but a day before the fire tore through, it was 49.6 degrees here, the hottest ever recorded in Canada. And as you can tell by the destruction still here, a year later, the weather is the only thing that's dramatically different.
1 year ago, Star Drynock, a mother of 2, was out of town getting groceries when she got a call. Litton was burning.
I felt helpless being away from them
my youngest for almost a week or two because I couldn't get to her.
At the time, she thought her father was missing too.
Terrifying because I know he wouldn't leave.
He's since been hailed a hero for staying back to try and save properties.
Proud to say that, he's my dad.
After spending 6 months in a hotel and being displaced again by November's floods in BC, she now lives in an apartment in the city of Merritt, about 2 hours away from Litton.
This was a gym, that was a really popular cafe.
Some residents marking the year since they lost those community favorites are burying a time capsule as crews work to remove metal and contaminated ash. The federal government recently announced $77 million in new funding for net zero fire-resistant rebuilds.
Roared through and decimated just about everything.
Among the 3 First Nation reserves that lost homes is Litton First Nation, where some residents have started to return home.
39 units on the ground today that are being in preparation for the people that lost the homes on the reserve to be able to move to.
A train was widely speculated to have caused the fire, but the Transportation Safety Board of Canada reported in October it had no evidence to support that. The RCMP and BC Wildfire Service are still investigating.
Like a sightseeing.
For Drynok, the experience inspired her to renew training as a medic to work on the front lines of future fires.
I know what BC went through last year, and I know there's a shortage of medics out there. So to me, it's a new start, new foundation.
As they all try to build back stronger. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Litton, BC.
Rebuilding, good for them. And that's Global National for this Thursday night. I'm Eric Sorensen. Tonight's Your Canada is this lupine flower field in Bon Shaw, Prince Edward Island. We love seeing Your Canada, so please email your pictures to viewers@globalnational.com. Colleen Christie will be here tomorrow. Thanks for watching.